Okay, picture this. There's this creature. It looks almost like a pine cone met an anteater, maybe?
Yeah, that's a pretty good description, actually.
Right. Covered in these overlapping scales, kind of shy, mostly active at night. That's the pangolin.
And they have that incredible tongue, for the ants and termites.
Oh yeah, apparently it's sticky and get this, longer than its entire body. Just wild.
Truly unique animals.
But here's the thing, and it's pretty shocking, despite being sort of obscure, this animal, it holds the title of the world's most trafficked mammal.
That's right, the most trafficked. It's a hidden crisis, really.
Yeah.
A huge red alert for a creature most people, maybe like you listening, haven't even heard much about.
Exactly. And that brings us to why we're doing this deep dive today. There was a big development, June 17th, 2025.
A really significant one.
Hmm.
The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service announced they're proposing to list 7 out of the 8 pangolin species under the Endangered Species Act.
7 out of 8. Wow.
Yeah. So our mission today is basically to unpack this. Why are these animals in such trouble? What drives this trafficking? And what does this specific U.S. action, this proposal, actually mean? Could it help?
We've been digging into it, looking at their biology, the whole illegal trade situation, the policy side of things here in the U.S.
It's a complex picture connecting this one unusual animal to some really big global issues.
So let's start with that title, most trafficked mammal. What's driving that? It can't be because they make good pets, right?
No, definitely not for their cuddliness.
Yeah.
The main drivers are really human activities and beliefs. Primarily, it's the demand for their scales,
The scales, what for?
mostly for traditional Chinese medicine. There's a long-standing belief that the scales have properties that can treat, well, a whole range of things: rheumatism, skin problems, other ailments.
But is there any truth to that, medically?
Well, scientifically, no. The scales are just keratin. It's the same stuff our fingernails are made of, or rhino horns. There's zero proven medical benefit. And interestingly, even some Chinese medical research has, debunked these uses. They've even removed pangolin scales from the official list of approved medicines.
But the demand persists.
Unfortunately, yeah. Ingrained beliefs are hard to shift, so the market, especially the illegal one, is still driven by it. That's one huge factor.
And you said there were two main drivers.
Right. The other is their meat. In some parts of Asia, and increasingly Africa, pangolin meat is considered a delicacy, sometimes a status symbol.
So direct consumption is also pushing them towards the edge.
Exactly. It puts immense pressure on populations wherever they're found.
It's just wild that this is happening even with international efforts. I mean, wasn't there a global ban put in place?
There was a pretty comprehensive one, actually, under CITES. That's the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. Since 2017, international commercial trade in all 8 species has been banned.
But it sounds like the illegal trade is just ignoring that.
Completely. It's rampant. We hear about seizures constantly. Tons of pangolin scales confiscated every year.
Tons. How many pangolins is that?
Well, think about it. It takes the scales from thousands of individual pangolins to make up just 1 ton.
Oh, wow.
So when you hear about multiple tons being seized, we're talking about tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of animals killed annually. It's almost unbelievable.
And there was that estimate for rest in Central Africa.
Yeah, that research suggesting over 8.5 million pangolins poached just in that region between 2014 and 2021.
8.5 million. That's like wiping out a major city's population.
In just a few years, yeah. Applied to these shy, slow-breeding animals, it shows the intensity, the sheer scale of the slaughter.
And this isn't just like small-time poachers, right? There's a darker side.
A much darker side. What authorities like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service point out is that this isn't isolated wildlife crime. The huge profits from trafficking pangolins and other wildlife often get funneled into funding other serious crimes.
Like what?
We're talking drug trafficking, arms smuggling, even human trafficking sometimes. These wildlife crime networks are deeply interwoven with global organized crime.
So stopping pangolin trafficking isn't just about saving the animal.
No, it's also about disrupting these dangerous criminal syndicates that threaten security on a much broader level.
Okay, so the global picture is, frankly, terrifying, which makes this U.S. move, proposing the ESA listing on June 17th, feel pretty important. What does that listing actually do?
So the Endangered Species Act, the ESA, it's a landmark piece of legislation here in the U.S., signed back in '73, had bipartisan support then.
It's the one that helped the bald eagle, right?
Exactly. Icons like the bald eagle owe their recovery in large part to the ESA. It protects over 2,000 species now, both U.S.-based and international ones.
So for pangolins, what would it mean?
It means much stricter rules within the U.S., tighter controls on importing, exporting, or selling any pangolin parts or products. It really aims to shut down the U.S. market, closing loopholes, even for older items that might have slipped through before.
Okay, so it impacts trade in the U.S.
Yes, but it also has a potential impact outside the U.S. An ESA listing can unlock federal funding and resources for conservation work in the pangolin's home countries,
Yeah.
where the poaching and habitat loss are actually happening.
That could be significant.
It could. And it's worth noting, one pangolin species, the Temminck's ground pangolin from Africa, was actually listed way back in the 1970s.
Oh, really? So one was already covered.
Yeah. This new proposal is to add the other 7. The 4 Asian species, Chinese, Indian, Sunda, Philippine, and the remaining 3 African ones, the white-bellied, black-bellied, and giant pangolin.
So if this goes through, all 8 would be protected under U.S. law.
That's the goal, yes.
But why now? If the situation's been bad for so long, you hear conservation groups have been pushing for this for ages.
They absolutely have. They've filed petitions, even lawsuits, trying to get the Fish and Wildlife Service to make decisions on listing pangolins and other species that were kind of stuck in bureaucratic limbo.
Right. I remember hearing about a settlement back in 2020 to force some deadlines.
Exactly. And scientifically, the alarm bells have been ringing for a while. The main global authority on species risk, the IUCN Red List, has had all 8 pangolins flagged as threatened, meaning endangered or critically endangered, since way back in 2014.
2014. So the urgency isn't new.
Not at all. And the population numbers just scream crisis.
Yeah.
You see estimates like the Chinese pangolin population dropping something like 94% in 60 years.
94%.
Or the Indian pangolin, a report from 2019 suggested an 80% decline in just 5 years. These are catastrophic collapses.
So poaching is the main killer, but you mention other factors too. It's not just the trafficking.
No, that's crucial. Habitat loss is a huge piece of the puzzle too. Deforestation for farming, logging, general development across Asia and Africa, it just shrinks the space they have left to live and find food.
And that makes them more vulnerable.
Definitely. And when populations get that small, that fragmented, you run into other problems like inbreeding, loss of genetic health. It makes it even harder for them to survive, let alone recover.
And they don't exactly breed like rabbits, do they?
Not even close. They typically have just one baby, one pup, per year.
Only one.
Yeah. So think about what happens when you lose an adult pangolin to a poacher, especially from a small, struggling population. You're not just losing that one animal. You're losing its entire reproductive potential for that year, maybe forever.
So recovery, even if we could stop all the poaching tomorrow, would be incredibly slow.
Painfully slow. It makes every single pangolin incredibly valuable for the species' survival.
Now, this is where things get interesting, maybe complicated. This proposal, June 17th, 2025, it arrives at a moment where there's, let's say, political discussion around the Endangered Species Act itself here in the U.S.
That's definitely part of the context, yes.
Yeah.
The sources we looked at mentioned that the current Trump administration, back in power since 2025, has indicated, plans or discussions about potentially adjusting how the ESA works.
Adjusting how?
Things like looking again at the definition of harm under the Act, maybe giving more weight to economic factors in decisions. There's been talk about energy projects, for instance, and ensuring the ESA doesn't impede development, considered essential.
And the Secretary of the Interior, Doug Burgum?
Right. He oversees fish and wildlife. He's been quoted saying he thinks the endangered species list is maybe too long or hasn't been as effective as it could be.
Okay.
Now, we're just relaying the positions stated in the materials we reviewed here, just reflecting that political backdrop against which this pangolin proposal is happening.
So what does that uncertainty mean for the pangolins? Does it weaken this potential lifeline?
It adds a question mark, certainly. The proposal itself is a positive step by the agency. But the final decision, and perhaps more importantly, the level of funding and enforcement that follows if it is finalized, that could be influenced by these broader political priorities.
But the listing itself, if it happens, still sends a message.
Absolutely. It's a strong signal internationally. The U.S. saying, we recognize this crisis, and we're taking steps to shut down our own market's role, however big or small that role is.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of hard to pressure other countries like China, where the demand is still a major issue if you're not cleaning up your own house, so to speak.
Precisely. One viewpoint highlighted that exact point, the wisdom of the U.S. closing its own doors if it's asking others to do the same.
And it really shows how global this is. You mentioned smuggling hotspots in India.
Yeah, places like Manipur and Tamil Nadu come up. Laws might be on the books, but enforcement on the ground is incredibly challenging. And we saw that pattern. As Asian pangolin numbers crashed, the poaching pressure just shifted massively to Africa.
Driven by the same criminal networks.
Often, yes. Highly organized, adaptable criminal groups that are involved in all sorts of illicit trade, just exploiting new territory. The pangolin's fate is really tied up in these complex international crime dynamics.
Okay, let's shift gears for a second. Enough doom and gloom. Let's just talk about how weirdly charming these animals are.
They really are.
That little waddle they do, sometimes almost walking on their hind legs, and the way they curl up.
Into that perfect, impenetrable-looking ball of scales. It's an amazing defense mechanism, utterly unique.
But they're not just quirky, right? They actually do important stuff for the environment.
Oh, hugely important. They're like nature's pest control service. Seriously. They eat enormous quantities of ants and termites.
Keeping those populations in check.
Exactly. And all their digging while foraging helps aerate the soil, which is great for the whole ecosystem. You mentioned they're sometimes called farmers' friends in India.
Yeah.
That's because they genuinely help control agricultural pests without needing pesticides. They provide a real service.
But there's that deeper significance, too. The idea that they're a sort of test for us.
Yeah, the litmus test for humanity idea. It's a powerful concept.
What does that mean exactly?
The thinking is, look, here's this creature. It's shy, it's harmless to humans, it actually helps us ecologically. If we can't even manage to protect this animal, if we let it vanish because of illegal trade and habitat destruction.
What hope is there for anything else?
Right. What does it say about our ability or our collective will to protect biodiversity more broadly? Their plight really holds up a mirror to our own actions and priorities.
And then there's the COVID connection or potential connection.
Yes, the potential link, still debated and researched, that pangolins might have served as an intermediate host, carrying the virus possibly from bats to humans, maybe through wildlife markets.
Which is not the pangolin's fault, obviously.
Absolutely not. It's a potential tragic consequence of how humans interact with wildlife, the wildlife trade, and encroaching on natural habitats. It just underscores how interconnected everything is: wildlife health, environmental health, our own health.
So back to the ESA proposal. What happens next? It's proposed, but it's not law yet.
Correct. The next step is a public comment period. It's usually 60 days, so starting from June 17, 2025, anyone you listening included can submit comments to the Fish and Wildlife Service.
Saying whether you support it.
Yeah, sharing your thoughts, your reasons. The service is legally required to review those public comments before they make a final decision on whether to officially list these 7 species.
And if they do finalize it?
Then it means, potentially, tougher penalties for trafficking within the U.S., tighter trade controls, and importantly, that possibility of dedicated funding for conservation projects in the pangolin's home countries.
But the impact depends on follow-through.
Exactly. Funding needs to be allocated, enforcement needs to be prioritized, and as we discussed, the political climate around the ESA itself adds a layer of complexity.
The challenges aren't going away overnight.
Definitely not. Poaching networks are resilient, cultural demand is stubborn, habitat loss continues. But there is reason for hope, too. The ESA does have a history of success stories.
Like the eagle.
Like the eagle, like the grizzly bear, others. Global awareness about pangolins is growing. We see people on social media, conservation groups working tirelessly. This U.S. proposal, if finalized, could add significant weight to those efforts and encourage other nations, too.
So for you listening right now, feeling maybe a bit overwhelmed but wanting to help, what can people actually do? How can you become, I don't know, a pangolin's BFF?
Well, there are concrete actions. First, just spread the word. Seriously, tell people about pangolins. Share facts. Share their story. Awareness is the first step. The more people know, the more pressure there is to act.
Okay, talk about them. What else?
Support the organizations doing the work. Groups like the Center for Biological Diversity, who fought for this listing, or the International Fund for Animal Welfare, working on anti-poaching, rescue, habitat protection. Even a small donation helps fund that critical on-the-ground work.
Makes sense. Support the experts.
And third, pretty obvious but crucial, never buy pangolin products. Scales, meat, leather, traditional medicine containing them. Avoid it completely. If you see it for sale, report it. Reducing demand is absolutely key.
Right. No demand, no trade.
And finally, use your voice as a citizen. Contact your elected officials. Let them know you support strong enforcement of the Endangered Species Act and that you want the U.S. to invest in international conservation. Policy decisions respond to public pressure.
Okay, so talk about them, support the groups, avoid the products, and speak up to lawmakers. Tangible things.
Exactly. Everyone can play a part.
So we've gone from this bizarre, fascinating creature most people hadn't heard of to understanding it's at the absolute epicenter of the illegal wildlife trade, facing extinction. We've seen the U.S. take a potentially vital step with this ESA proposal, but also the challenges and political winds surrounding it.
And we've touched on why they matter ecologically as these helpful farmers' friends, and symbolically as that litmus test for our own relationship with the natural world.
Keep these scaly, shy underdogs in mind. Their story is far from over.
Yeah, and maybe leave you with this thought. Considering how little known they are, yet how incredibly valuable ecologically, and how tragically central they've become to global wildlife crime. How does the pangolin story make you reconsider which species matter and what real conservation demands from all of us, everywhere? It's more than just laws, isn't it? It's about demand, awareness, and international cooperation on a massive scale. Something to think about.